Have you ever wondered why some women seem to move through relationships, men, and even entire lives, leaving behind a trail of confusion, obsession, and ruin? It's never just about love. It's never just about connection. There's something deeper at play, something darker, something no one dares to talk about, because it exposes a cruel, inconvenient truth about female desire. A truth hidden not just from men, but often from themselves. You may think it's just a game. You may believe it's bad luck. You may tell yourself, she changed. She's not who I thought. But the patterns were always there, right in front of you. And when we look through the psychological lens of Carl Jung, when we examine the unconscious forces shaping desire, seduction, and discard, it becomes terrifyingly clear. It was never personal. It was never about you. It was about a hunger, a psychological engine running beneath awareness, one that feeds on attention, validation, control, and when that no longer satisfies, it moves on. And here's the cruel part. It's not even conscious. It's instinct. It's shadow. It's the side of the feminine psyche that no one wants to admit exists. This is why her body count never ends. In this video, we'll break down the unconscious mechanisms behind this pattern, how female desire, driven by instinct, shadow, and unmet psychological needs, creates a cycle that no one wants to name. But you've felt it. You've lived it. Get ready. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. The hidden hunger behind female desire. There's something you were never told about female desire. Something that modern conversations conveniently ignore. Not because it isn't real, but because it's uncomfortable. It doesn't fit into the pretty narratives of love, romance, and equality. When Carl Jung explored the human psyche, he uncovered what most people never have the courage to face. That every single person lives with an unconscious shadow, a hidden part of themselves filled with suppressed impulses, unmet needs, and instincts we don't want to admit exist. And when it comes to the feminine psyche, one of the most misunderstood shadows is the hunger. Not physical hunger, not just sexual hunger, but a complex psychological hunger for validation, significance, admiration, and emotional consumption. A hunger that, when left unconscious, becomes an endless engine, a machine that feeds, but is never full. This isn't about cruelty. It's not about evil. It's not even conscious manipulation most of the time. In fact, that's what makes it so dangerous. It's automatic. The feminine psyche carries an archetypal pattern Jung referred to as the devouring feminine. You see it in mythology, folklore, and religious symbols throughout history. The siren, the seductress, the femme fatale, the dark mother. Figures that attract, consume, and then move on. Not because they are villains in the story, but because this pattern lives inside the unconscious feminine, a response to internal emptiness, unintegrated wounds, and the endless search for something or someone to make it feel whole. But here's the cruel paradox. It never works. No amount of validation is ever enough. No amount of attention ever fills the void. And so the cycle continues. The truth is, this isn't about any single man. This isn't even personal. You were never the point. What she really craves is relief from her own emptiness, a distraction from her own unmet self, an escape from the gnawing hunger that whispers, "You're not enough. You'll never be enough. Find more. Take more. Feed." But like drinking salt water to quench thirst, the more she consumes, the thirstier she becomes. That's why so many men are left shattered, confused, discarded, wondering what changed, why it suddenly became cold, why affection turned to distance, and why presence turned to absence. It wasn't random. It wasn't a mistake. It was the unconscious hunger playing out its script. Again. The tragedy is, most women don't even realize this pattern is running them. It operates beneath awareness. It's the shadows game. Jung taught that the only way out of the shadows' control is to bring it into consciousness, to see it, name it, integrate it. But how often does that happen? How often does anyone, male or female, willingly look into the mirror of their shadow? It's easier to blame the other. It's him. He's boring now. It's his fault. He's not exciting anymore. Or for the man, I wasn't good enough. I should have done more. Both are wrong. Both are lies told by the unconscious mind to avoid the deeper truth. The hunger was never about you. It was there long before you arrived. And it will be there long after you're gone. This is the hidden engine behind the phrase, her body count never ends. Because the hunger never ends. The men change. The names change. The faces change. But the pattern remains. Until the day it's finally confronted. And here's the part no one dares to say out loud. If she never does the inner work, if she never meets her own shadow, the hunger stays. Forever. Why attention feeds, but never fills her. At first it feels simple. She seeks attention, you give it. She wants validation, you offer it. She needs to feel special, chosen, admired, and you deliver through your time, effort, presence, affection, and words. For a brief moment, everything seems perfect. You believe you finally figured it out. You think this is the key that holds everything together. But soon, the warmth begins to fade. The same attention that once made her smile now feels irrelevant. The same efforts that drew her closer now feel invisible. You begin to question yourself. What did I do wrong? Why isn't it enough anymore? Why did it change so fast? The cruel reality is that you didn't necessarily do anything wrong. The problem isn't your effort. The problem is that you are trying to fill a space that was never designed to be filled by anyone else. From the lens of Jungian psychology, this is what we call the pursuit of external completion. When someone carries an unhealed wound inside, especially one they are unaware of, the unconscious mind starts seeking something external to temporarily soothe that emptiness. In the case of the feminine psyche trapped in this pattern, attention becomes like oxygen. It keeps her afloat, but only for a short while before the suffocating sensation returns. The attention itself is not truly what she desires. It is not about the words, the texts, the gifts, or the presents. It is about what the attention symbolizes at a psychological level. Attention whispers to the unconscious mind. I exist. I matter. I am desirable. I am enough, at least for now. But there is a devastating flaw hidden in this process. External validation, no matter how intense, how genuine or how frequent, has an expiration date. The human mind adapts. What once felt exciting now feels routine. What once felt intoxicating slowly becomes boring, irrelevant, or even suffocating. The dopamine fades. The novelty dies. What was once the source of joy becomes the source of irritation. This is the moment when most men report the same sentence. She changed. But the truth is she didn't change. The chemical high faded. The fantasy collapsed. The temporary distraction from her internal emptiness expired. Now the same voice inside that drove her to crave attention returns, whispering the same haunting message. You need more. Find something new. That is when the distance starts. Warmth turns cold. Connection becomes detachment. Affection fades into avoidance. And the worst part is, she often cannot explain why. To her conscious mind, it feels like something shifted. Maybe she believes you changed. Maybe she convinces herself the relationship lost the spark. But in reality, it is the same unresolved hunger resurfacing again. Carl Jung understood this deeply. The unconscious mind constantly seeks ways to avoid confronting internal wounds. And one of the most common methods is attempting to patch an internal void with external stimulation. But the psyche doesn't work that way. The unconscious may be temporarily distracted, but it cannot be permanently satisfied by anything external. No man on earth can outrun a woman's unresolved relationship with her own emptiness. No amount of proving, pleasing, texting, gifting, or fixing will ever be enough for someone who hasn't faced the darker parts of her own psyche. And here lies the brutal truth no one dares to speak. The hunger for attention isn't truly about the man standing in front of her. It was never about him. It wasn't about the one before him either. And it won't be about the one after. It's about a desperate attempt to escape the inner void by consuming external energy, attention, validation, admiration, as if any of it could offer a permanent cure. And when the attention starts to lose its flavor, the scanning begins. The unconscious mind seeks a new source, a new admirer, a new validation hit, a new psychological meal. Not out of cruelty, not out of conscious malice, but because this is how the shadow operates when left unseen and unhealed. And the men left behind? They sit confused, discarded, wondering what invisible rule they failed to follow. But the answer was never about them. It was never about you. It was about a void that no man could ever fill. This is the psychological mechanism behind the phrase, "Her body count never ends." Because when attention feeds but never fills, the search can never stop. The seduction discard cycle. Explained. There is a pattern deeply embedded within the unconscious feminine psyche that almost no one talks about, yet it's visible everywhere, in relationships that start with obsession and passion, only to collapse into confusion, coldness, and rejection. What begins with intensity, desire, admiration, and connection suddenly turns into distance, emotional withdrawal, and in some cases, complete disappearance. This is not random. It is not about bad luck or bad timing. It is a psychological mechanism that operates automatically beneath conscious awareness. In Jungian psychology, this is a perfect example of the unconscious shadow in motion, a hidden program running silently in the background. A program designed not to create deep connection, but to temporarily soothe internal emptiness through external stimulation. It always starts with the seduction phase. This is when the feminine energy appears magnetic, captivating, intoxicating. Her attention is intense. Her affection feels absolute. Every glance, every word, every gesture sends the message that you are special, different, chosen. This is the phase where many men fall deeply and dangerously in love. It feels like destiny, as if you were meant for each other. But beneath that intoxicating presence, there is something else happening. A transaction, not consciously but unconsciously. You are being consumed. Your energy, attention, presence, validation, all of it becomes psychological fuel. The feminine shadow does not consciously intend to harm, but its hunger demands to be fed. As long as the seduction feels new, as long as the emotional high remains, the connection stays alive. But the human mind always adapts. Dopamine always fades. Novelty always decays. And when it does, the hunger returns. Only now, the previous source of satisfaction begins to feel suffocating. What once was exciting is now boring. What once was captivating is now irritating. Then the discard begins. The warmth starts to disappear. Conversations become shorter. The smiles fade. The intimacy weakens. And in its place comes distance, criticism, avoidance, and in some cases, outright coldness. The same person who once looked at you as if you were the center of her universe now behaves as if you are an inconvenience, an annoyance, or worse, invisible. Men caught in this phase are left in shock. They obsessively try to figure out what went wrong. Did I say something? Did I not do enough? Should I have been more present, more exciting, more patient? But none of those questions lead to answers, because the truth is far more unsettling. It was never about what you did or didn't do. The pattern was never about you. The seduction discard cycle is not personal. It is a coping mechanism, a way to escape an unresolved internal void. The seduction provides temporary relief. The discard comes when the relief wears off and the hunger returns, demanding something new. This is why men in this pattern are often replaced with disturbing speed. The new man is not better. He is simply new. He is the next dose, the next distraction, the next attempt to fill the same internal emptiness. And when his novelty expires, the cycle repeats once again. Carl Jung's work on the shadow makes it clear. What is left unconscious controls our lives. And until it is brought into consciousness, it will be repeated as fate. This is exactly how the feminine shadow plays out this cycle. Unless the woman confronts her own emptiness, unless she faces the mirror of her shadow, the hunger never stops. Men, unaware of this process, often believe that more effort, more love, more patience can change the outcome. But that belief leads to burnout, emotional exhaustion, and often deep psychological damage, because no amount of external effort can solve someone else's unresolved inner war. The most devastating realization is this: you were not chosen because of who you are. You were chosen because you were available, willing, and new. You represented a temporary escape, and when that escape expired, so did the connection. This is the reason the phrase "her body count never ends" holds such brutal accuracy. Not because of physical numbers alone, but because the psychological pattern of seduction and discard is endless until the shadow is seen, understood, and integrated. This isn't a judgment. This is psychology. This is how the unconscious works, for both men and women, when we refuse to face the truth of what lives inside. And once you've seen this pattern, you can't unsee it. The void that can't be satisfied. There is something that very few people understand about the feminine psyche, and it is this. When the hunger comes from the shadow, when it is born out of disconnection from the self, nothing outside will ever be enough. This is not just a relationship problem. It is not about men failing to meet expectations or women being too demanding. This is a deeper psychological fracture, one that has its roots in an invisible void. And the terrifying truth is that this void cannot be filled externally, not by love, not by attention, not by validation, and not by another person. Carl Jung spent his life studying how the unconscious shapes behavior. His work made it painfully clear that when someone is disconnected from their inner self, from their own soul, a black hole opens inside. A psychological emptiness. A void that the conscious mind tries desperately to fill with distractions, consumption, and external stimulation. For many women operating unconsciously from this space, the void becomes an invisible driver of behavior. It whispers constantly, "You need more attention, more excitement, more admiration, more validation." But no matter how much is given, the satisfaction is temporary. The void always returns, demanding more. This is why men often report that no matter what they did, no matter how much they provided emotionally, physically, financially, or psychologically, it was never enough. because they were trying to solve a problem that was never theirs to solve. A man cannot outlove a woman's unresolved relationship with her own emptiness. You can be perfect, attentive, supportive, loving, generous, and it will still not be enough for someone whose hunger comes from a place no one else can reach. The void isn't created by the lack of a man. It isn't caused by a partner's behavior. It is created by being out of alignment with one's own inner world, disconnected from the self, the soul, the authentic being beneath the masks, projections, and performances. And the most dangerous part, the feminine shadow has learned how to hide this from everyone, including herself. On the surface, it appears as confidence, independence, or even hypersexuality. But beneath the surface is a constant hum of dissatisfaction, restlessness, and emotional emptiness. This is the woman who feels bored easily, who loses interest without knowing why, who can't tolerate emotional stability because stability feels too quiet, too still. And in that stillness, the void becomes impossible to ignore. That's why drama becomes addictive, chaos becomes stimulating, the chase becomes more exciting than the catch. Because in the noise of emotional highs and lows, the silence of the void temporarily disappears, but it always comes back. This is the tragic truth no one wants to face. The void cannot be filled. It can only be confronted. It can only be healed when the person finally stops looking outward and begins the terrifying journey inward. The journey Jung called individuation, the process of integrating the unconscious and becoming whole. Until that happens, the pattern continues endlessly. The seduction discard cycle repeats. Relationships are burned through. Partners become disposable. And the woman herself remains a prisoner of her own unconscious hunger. And here is where most men fall into a dangerous trap. Believing that if they just try harder, love better, become more, they can fix what feels broken. But the brutal truth is that you cannot be her solution to a problem that was there long before you arrived. This is why men who try to be the hero in this dynamic often end up emotionally destroyed, drained, questioning their own worth, and sometimes permanently damaged, because they were never meant to be the cure. They were only ever a temporary distraction from a war that isn't theirs. And here is the most important thing Jung's work teaches us about this dynamic. Until the void is confronted, it is infinite. You could give her the world, and she would still feel like something is missing, because what is missing is not out there. It's inside. And no man, no relationship, no external validation can ever substitute the internal connection she has lost with herself. This is the uncomfortable reality behind the phrase her body count never ends. Not because of physical numbers alone, but because the psychological hunger is endless until the person finally stops running from their own reflection. The shadow cannot be satisfied. The shadow can only be integrated. And until that happens, the void remains. Why stability feels like boredom. This is one of the most misunderstood dynamics in relationships today. It's the paradox that leaves men feeling completely disoriented. You do everything right. You show up. You're reliable. You're stable. You offer consistency, presence, and emotional safety. The very things society claims women want. And yet, somehow, she pulls away. She grows distant, cold, irritated, detached. It doesn't make sense on the surface. After all, shouldn't stability be the foundation for love, trust, and connection? Shouldn't being consistent make her feel more secure, more connected, more loving? In theory, yes. But in practice, especially when the feminine shadow is running the show, stability often triggers boredom instead of connection. Carl Jung's work explains this perfectly. When someone carries an unresolved internal void, the unconscious begins to crave stimulation, not stability. Because stability creates quiet. And in that quiet, the psychological emptiness becomes impossible to ignore. Without the noise of chaos, drama, or emotional highs and lows, the person is left face to face with themselves, with their own shadow, their own wounds, their own disconnection from the self. For someone operating unconsciously from this place, chaos feels safer than peace. Drama feels more comfortable than calm. The roller coaster of emotional intensity feels alive, while the stillness of stability feels suffocating. This is why you see the pattern play out over and over. She chases excitement. She desires the highs of seduction, the thrill of the unknown, the dopamine rush of unpredictability. But the moment the relationship enters the stage of stability, when the mystery fades, when the routine sets in, the internal void begins whispering again. The hunger returns. The restlessness grows. And then the withdrawal begins. Her texts become shorter. Her presence feels colder. The enthusiasm disappears. The same man who once made her smile now feels like an irritation simply for existing in her space. Men are left questioning themselves. Was I too nice? Was I too predictable? Should I have played more games? Should I have withheld affection to keep her guessing? But the truth is, none of these strategies address the real issue. The problem isn't you. The problem is that no man can outrun a woman's relationship with her own boredom. Because her boredom isn't really about you. It's about the silence that stability creates. That silence exposes the shadow, the unhealed parts, the emptiness that attention, validation, and external stimulation can't fix. And when that happens, the unconscious begins scanning for something or someone new. Something exciting, something chaotic, something that offers the illusion of aliveness without requiring the actual work of inner healing. This is why the same woman who once claimed to crave peace, safety, and stability suddenly finds herself pulled toward chaos, unpredictability, or the thrill of emotional games. Not because she is consciously cruel, but because her unconscious is running a program. A survival strategy to avoid sitting in the discomfort of her own inner void. And this is where countless men break themselves, trying to be both the safe place and the source of endless stimulation. But the truth is brutal. You cannot be both. Stability and chaos cannot coexist. And trying to become her circus to avoid her boredom will only destroy your own peace. This isn't about playing harder games. It isn't about manipulating desire. It's about understanding the psychological truth. If her peace feels boring, it's not because peace is the problem. It's because her relationship with herself is broken. The mask of independence. Modern society has popularized the image of the independent woman. Strong, empowered, needing no one, answering to no one. On the surface, it looks like power. It looks like freedom. It looks like evolution. But beneath the surface, for many, this mask of independence hides something much darker, a deep fear of intimacy, vulnerability, and true connection. Carl Jung's work with the shadow helps decode this perfectly. When someone disconnects from their inner self, from their wounds, their fears, their unresolved emotional pain, the psyche builds defenses. It creates masks. And one of the most common masks in the modern feminine psyche is hyper-independence. On the surface, she says, "I don't need anyone." Beneath the surface, the unconscious whispers, "If I let someone truly see me, they'll see how empty I feel inside." Independence becomes a shield, a way to avoid the terrifying vulnerability of intimacy, because intimacy requires being seen. It requires stillness. It requires dropping the performance, removing the mask, and facing what's actually there. For someone whose shadow contains unprocessed wounds, abandonment, rejection, betrayal, true intimacy feels dangerous. The closer someone gets, the louder the unconscious fear becomes, so the defense mechanism kicks in. Independence becomes not a choice, but a compulsion. And here is the paradox. She craves love, but fears it. She desires closeness, but pushes it away. She longs for deep connection, but sabotages it the moment it becomes real. Because real intimacy threatens to expose the very emptiness she has spent her entire life trying to hide. This is why you see patterns where she oscillates between craving attention and fleeing from commitment, between demanding connection and rejecting stability, between seducing and discarding, because the shadow both craves and fears being seen. Hyper-independence is not the evidence of healed feminine power. It is often the evidence of unhealed feminine wounds. Wounds that whisper, if I depend on anyone, I'll be disappointed. If I trust, I'll be betrayed. If I let someone in, they'll see the parts of me I cannot accept in myself. This is not strength. This is armor. This is survival. And it's a survival strategy that destroys connection, love, and intimacy in the process. For the men caught in this dynamic, the pain is sharp and confusing. One moment, you are drawn in by her intensity, her confidence, her magnetic independence. The next, you are shut out, pushed away, made to feel irrelevant for daring to get too close. And the truth is, you were never rejected for being who you are. You were rejected because your presence threatened to expose the very emptiness she has spent her life hiding, even from herself. Why you were never the problem. This is the most painful realization for most men who survive this psychological storm. After the emotional roller coaster, the seduction, the intensity, the connection, the sudden coldness, the rejection, you are left standing in the ruins, questioning everything. Was I not enough? Did I do something wrong? Should I have been more? Tried harder? Been different? The mind spirals, desperately searching for an answer, for closure, for understanding. But the cruel truth is this: you were never the problem. You were never the solution either. Because it was never about you. It was about the war inside her that started long before you arrived, and will continue long after you're gone. What you experienced wasn't a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of her unresolved relationship with herself, her own emptiness, her shadow, her disconnection from her inner world. You were the mirror. And when a mirror starts reflecting things someone doesn't want to face, the natural response of the unconscious is simple: break the mirror. This is why the man who tries harder, loves more, gives more, bends more, only finds himself punished for it. Because the problem was never the lack of effort. It was the fact that effort cannot fix a wound that doesn't belong to you. The attention you gave wasn't enough, not because your attention was flawed, but because attention was never the true need. The love you offered wasn't enough, not because your love was lacking, but because no love can substitute for the absence of self-love. In truth, you were used, not consciously, not with malicious intent, but as a psychological tool, a temporary anesthetic for the pain she refuses to face within herself. When you entered her life, you became the dopamine hit, the emotional bandage, the escape from her own reflection. But bandages wear out, dopamine fades, and when it did, the very presence that once brought comfort became unbearable, not because you changed, but because you stayed long enough for the fantasy to collapse and the reality of her own void to resurface. And that's when the discard came. Coldness, distance, silence, and the brutal attempt to convince you and herself that you were the problem. But you weren't. You never were. Carl Jung said it best. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. You were never the problem. You were the mirror. And that was the real threat. And here's what no one tells you. Recognizing this pattern isn't enough, because understanding is only the first step. If you don't start working on your own unconscious patterns, your own shadow, you'll keep attracting the same wounds in a different body. That's exactly why I created the SIM method, a practical tool based on shadow work, integration, and mindfulness. Just 5 minutes a day to turn emotional chaos into clarity and finally break free from cycles like this. You'll find the link to the ebook inside the pinned comment. Because the real escape isn't about fixing them. It's about finally choosing yourself. There's a brutal, uncomfortable truth that no one prepares you for. You can be the best man she's ever met, and still not be enough for someone who isn't enough for herself. You cannot outlove someone's emptiness. You cannot fix what was broken long before you arrived. You cannot save someone from a war they are determined to avoid fighting within themselves. And the cruelest part? She might never realize it. She will move on, find another, and another. Each one becoming the next temporary escape, the next emotional distraction, the next man who steps into the same cycle, believing, just like you once did, that this time it's different. But the void remains. The shadow remains. The hunger remains. Because no amount of attention, affection, admiration, or devotion can fill the emptiness that comes from being disconnected from the self. And here's the hardest pill you'll ever swallow. It was never about you. And it never will be. You were simply there, a reflection, a projection, a momentary fix. And the day you realize that, something shifts. You stop blaming yourself. You stop negotiating with a ghost. You stop trying to heal someone else's shadow at the expense of your own light. You finally understand what no one ever told you. The moment you stop chasing the broken is the moment you realize it was never you who was broken. And if you think this truth is cruel, wait until you realize this. She'll do it again. And again. And again. Because until she faces herself, her desire will always be hunger disguised as love.